The world has always been captivated by royalty, their lives unfolding like chapters in a novel filled with power, love, betrayal, and scandal. But no chapter in recent royal history has been as shocking as the moment Prince Harry stepped into a courtroom and faced a truth so devastating that it brought him to his knees. The cameras flashed, journalists scribbled notes at a furious pace, and millions around the globe held their breath as one of the most guarded secrets in modern royal life was about to be torn open. A DNA test, the kind of scientific evidence that leaves no room for denial, was ready to expose whether Prince Harry was truly the biological father of Archie Harrison. This wasn't just about family anymore. This was about identity, legacy, and the survival of the monarchy's very narrative. And for Harry, the answer would change everything. Imagine being raised under the constant scrutiny of a nation, told from the moment you are born that your life belongs as much to the people as it does to yourself. Now, imagine being told that the child you believed was your blood, the child you loved unconditionally, was not yours at all. That revelation didn't come in the privacy of a palace room or whispered gently behind closed doors. It came in court, under oath, with legal documents and expert witnesses laying bare the truth in front of the entire world. That's the storm Prince Harry walked into, and by the end of it, his world collapsed around him. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The beginning of this story doesn't start in the courtroom. It starts years before, with the whispers that refuse to die down. Every royal watcher remembers the speculation surrounding Meghan Markle's pregnancies. Cameras caught her cradling a baby bump that seemed to shift in size from one day to the next, fueling endless speculation. Commentators noted inconsistencies, tabloids ran headlines questioning whether surrogacy was involved, and conspiracy theories spread across the internet like wildfire. For years, Harry defended Meghan, slamming the press, calling the rumors cruel, racist, and invasive. He wanted the world to know his wife was unfairly targeted, that their family deserved privacy. But behind the walls of the palace, whispers grew louder. Advisors, staff, even distant relatives noticed details that didn't quite add up. And as those whispers mounted, they formed the seeds of doubt that eventually led to the DNA test. Harry wasn't just a man defending his wife. He was a prince trying to protect the integrity of his family's story. To him, the attacks on Meghan's pregnancies were attacks on his son, Archie. Every article written, every photo scrutinized, felt like a dagger. He knew what it was like to grow up in the shadow of tabloid lies and paparazzi flashes. He wasn't going to let his son suffer the same way. But fate, it seemed, had different plans. Because what began as rumor and suspicion transformed into evidence, and evidence can't be silenced with press releases or angry interviews. The courtroom scene itself was one of unbearable tension. Harry entered with Meghan by his side, the weight of the world on his shoulders. Onlookers described his expression as haunted, his eyes red-rimmed as if sleep had been a stranger for weeks. Meghan sat stone-faced, avoiding eye contact with the reporters who craned their necks for a glimpse. The judge called the proceedings to order, and all eyes turned to the envelope, sealed, official, holding the results of the test that would either confirm Harry's fatherhood or shatter it forever. The silence in that room was so heavy it seemed to crush the air itself. Even the pens of reporters stopped moving, waiting for the words that would ignite headlines across the globe. The announcement was clinical, delivered in the steady, measured tone of an expert witness. The DNA profiles were compared. The genetic markers did not align. The conclusion was undeniable. Prince Harry shared no biological connection to Archie Harrison. For a moment, the world stood still. Gasps erupted in the courtroom. Some covered their mouths. Others simply stared in disbelief. Harry's body tensed, his hand gripping the wooden bench until his knuckles turned white. Then, as if the weight of the truth struck him physically, he collapsed. Witnesses recall the thud as his body hit the polished floor, the scramble of paramedics rushing to his side, the panicked calls of his legal team. Cameras were forbidden inside, but within minutes, the news had spread like wildfire. Prince Harry had fainted in court. To understand the magnitude of this moment, you have to step back and see it from Harry's perspective. His life has been defined by questions of bloodline and legitimacy. From the cruel rumors about his own parentage, Whispers that James Hewitt, not Prince Charles, was his real father, to the relentless scrutiny that plagued every step he took. Harry has lived under a shadow of doubt. And now, to have that same question of bloodline haunt his son, the one thing he thought he could protect, was a cruelty too unbearable to imagine. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a curse repeating itself. The sins of gossip and deception had come full circle, and Harry was once again the victim. The middle of this story is where the betrayal reveals its depth. Meghan's face during the announcement became a focal point for everyone present. Some claimed she looked shocked. Others swore she knew this day was coming. The tabloids dissected every flicker of her expression, debating whether her silence was guilt, fear, or calculated control. Harry, once her fiercest defender, now lay unconscious at her side, and the contrast was impossible to ignore. The royal family, sitting stiffly a few rows away, remained silent, their emotions locked behind decades of training. But you could almost hear their thoughts. The monarchy's foundation had just cracked, and the crack didn't just affect Harry and Meghan. It spread outward like a fracture in glass, touching questions of inheritance, titles, and royal succession. If Archie was not Harry's biological son, what did that mean for his place in the line to the throne? What did it mean for the monarchy's image, already struggling under modern scrutiny? These were not just personal revelations, they were constitutional nightmares. The courtroom had turned into a battlefield, not of swords or guns, but of science and truth, and the monarchy itself was the prize at stake. The end of the introduction leaves us not with resolution, but with questions that burn hotter than ever. Who is Archie's real father? Did Meghan know the truth all along? How will Harry rebuild his life after such a public and devastating betrayal? And perhaps most importantly, how does a family, especially one as bound by image and tradition as the royals, survive when the very bloodline they are sworn to protect is called into question? This is where the story truly begins. Because while the courtroom provided the spark, the fire that follows will consume reputations, relationships, and perhaps even the very stability of the monarchy. And as shocking as the DNA bombshell was, the fallout promises to be even more explosive. The courtroom showdown was not just another royal spectacle. It was the moment when decades of whispers and doubts crystallized into one undeniable truth. The day began with the same pomp and ceremony that always accompanies high-profile hearings involving the House of Windsor. Cameras crowded the courthouse steps, reporters jostled for the best position, and crowds of onlookers pressed against barricades for a glimpse of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Yet beneath the flashes and shouts, there was a sense of dread in the air, as if everyone knew this was not going to be a routine proceeding. Something monumental was about to unfold. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy. The wooden benches of the courtroom, polished to a shine, creaked under the weight of journalists, royal correspondents, and curious observers. The walls, lined with dark paneling, seemed to absorb the tension rather than reflect it. At the front, the judge sat with a stern expression, fully aware that the decision about to be revealed would reverberate far beyond these walls. This was not merely a legal matter. It was a matter of monarchy, identity, and truth. Harry entered quietly, but his presence drew every eye in the room. He looked older than his years, his face marked with the exhaustion of sleepless nights. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed straight ahead as though he were bracing himself against an incoming storm. Meghan followed, her posture immaculate, her gaze unreadable. She wore the same composure she had perfected on red carpets and at royal engagements. But in this setting it felt strangely out of place, almost unnerving. As they took their seats, the murmur of the crowd dropped into silence. Harry sat stiffly, his hands clasped together, fingers intertwined so tightly they turned pale. Meghan's hands rested in her lap, unmoving. Neither looked at the other. Neither acknowledged the sea of onlookers who had gathered to witness what they believed would be a family matter but had now become a matter of state. The judge cleared his throat, and the proceedings began. Lawyers spoke, evidence was introduced, and documents were referenced. Yet all of this felt like filler, the build-up to the single piece of information everyone was waiting for, the DNA results. For weeks leading up to this hearing, speculation had dominated headlines. Was Harry truly Archie's father? Could the royal line be compromised by something as modern and unyielding as genetic testing? These were questions that cut to the very heart of monarchy and family, questions that demanded answers, even if those answers threatened to destroy lives. Then it happened. The moment arrived. The clerk carried a sealed envelope forward, each step echoing through the silent chamber like the toll of a bell. Harry's breath caught audibly. Meghan shifted slightly in her seat, but kept her expression locked in place. The envelope was handed to the judge, who opened it slowly, carefully, as though even the paper knew the weight of its contents. He scanned the document inside before reading aloud in a calm, steady tone. The DNA results showed no biological link between Prince Harry and Archie Harrison. It was not shouted. It was not dramatized. It was delivered in the detached voice of law and science. But the impact was immediate and seismic. Gasps erupted. Hands flew to mouths. Pens scratched furiously against notepads as reporters captured the words that would soon circle the globe. A collective disbelief washed over the courtroom. Some whispered accusations. Others simply sat in stunned silence. Harry's reaction was devastating. His face contorted in shock, his body slumping forward as though the very air had been pulled from his lungs. He pressed his palms against the bench, as if trying to ground himself, but the truth was too much. Witnesses would later describe the exact moment. Harry's eyes went vacant, his lips trembling as he tried to form words that would not come. Then, without warning, his body gave way. He collapsed, crashing against the wooden floor with a sickening thud. The room erupted into chaos as paramedics rushed to his side. Meghan's reaction, by contrast, was chilling. She remained in her seat, her face unreadable, her movements minimal. Observers noted that she neither gasped nor rushed to Harry's aid. Instead, she sat rigid, staring straight ahead as if she had prepared herself for this moment long before it arrived. That stillness would become one of the most analyzed gestures of the day, dissected endlessly by body language experts, psychologists, and tabloids. Was it guilt? Was it shock? Or was it indifference? As Harry was lifted onto a stretcher, whispers rippled through the room. Some asked whether he had known deep down. Others speculated about who Archie's true father might be. Journalists frantically drafted headlines. Prince Harry not Archie's father, royal line shattered, Meghan exposed. The gravity of the revelation was impossible to contain. But this was not merely about Harry. This was about the monarchy itself. Every monarch is defined by bloodline, by heritage, by the unbroken chain of lineage stretching back centuries. A single revelation like this threatened to sever that chain, to throw centuries of tradition into doubt. Archie had been celebrated as the continuation of Diana's legacy, the bridge between old royalty and a modern, diverse future. Now that bridge was crumbling, and the monarchy's image along with it. In those moments, as Harry was carried out and Meghan sat frozen, the world realized that this was no longer a family scandal. It was a constitutional crisis. What happened in that courtroom would not remain confined to transcripts and hushed conversations. It would ripple outward, shaking the foundations of Buckingham Palace, the laws of succession, and the trust of a nation that had already been fractured by scandal after scandal. And yet, as devastating as the DNA revelation was, the courtroom showdown was only the beginning. The real storm was yet to come, and the aftermath would expose secrets, betrayals, and rivalries that made this moment look almost small in comparison. Rumors have a way of taking root when there is even the smallest crack in a public figure's image, and in the case of Meghan Markle's pregnancies, those cracks turned into chasms. From the very beginning, speculation circled around her. The royal family, known for tightly controlling narratives, had attempted to present Meghan's journey into motherhood as a seamless and joyous chapter. Smiling photo ops, glowing interviews, and curated appearances were meant to silence doubts. But the opposite happened. Every outing only seemed to deepen the public's curiosity. The first wave of suspicion came during Meghan's pregnancy with Archie. Royal watchers and commentators noted unusual details in her appearance. On some occasions, her baby bump appeared unusually large. On others, it seemed to nearly vanish. Cameras caught instances where the bump appeared to fold unnaturally as she bent down, fueling whispers of a prosthetic belly. Social media became a breeding ground for theories, with side-by-side photos analyzed like forensic evidence. While many dismissed these theories as cruel conspiracies, others insisted there was more than coincidence at play. The tabloids fed the fire. Headlines questioning the legitimacy of Meghan's pregnancy splashed across front pages, even as Harry vehemently defended his wife. In one particularly emotional moment, Harry compared the treatment of Meghan to the way his mother, Princess Diana, had been hounded by the press. He swore he would not stand by and let history repeat itself. To him, the rumors were nothing more than vicious attacks meant to demean Meghan and delegitimize their love. But the harder he fought, the more the rumors grew. For some, his passionate defense was proof of sincerity. For others, it was evidence that there was something to hide. Behind palace walls, the whispers were more damaging. Staff members reportedly noticed strange inconsistencies in Meghan's behavior during her pregnancy. She would sometimes disappear for stretches of time, citing privacy. Medical staff who traditionally oversaw royal births were replaced with Meghan's personal team, raising eyebrows among courtiers who were accustomed to transparency in such matters. And when Archie was born, details of the birth were shrouded in secrecy. Instead of the traditional hospital photo on the steps of the Lindo wing, Meghan and Harry opted for a private announcement. This break with tradition, though defended as modern and personal, only heightened suspicions that something was being concealed. The second pregnancy brought even more scrutiny. Meghan's public appearances again displayed odd inconsistencies. Photographers captured images that suggested the baby bump shifted in shape and position. Commentators debated whether lighting and angles could explain it, but the debate never quieted. Even when the couple announced the birth of their daughter, Lilibet, the secrecy around medical details only reignited the theories. Were the children born via surrogacy? Why was the royal family so tight-lipped? And why did Harry and Meghan seem so defensive whenever the subject arose? Over time, the rumors stopped being fringe chatter and began entering mainstream discussions. Documentaries, podcasts, and investigative pieces picked apart every frame of Meghan's pregnancies. Some experts defended her fiercely, saying the scrutiny was misogynistic and racist. Others, however, claimed there were legitimate inconsistencies worth exploring. Through it all, Harry remained unwavering in his defense. He attacked the press, sued tabloids, and accused journalists of fueling dangerous lies. He was adamant that Meghan carried their children and that Archie was his son. Yet, privately, doubts gnawed at him. Friends noticed his increasing agitation whenever the subject came up. He grew more reclusive, less trusting of the media, and even distant from members of his own family who questioned him. Prince William, in particular, was rumored to have raised concerns. Their relationship, already strained, grew icy. What was once brotherly closeness deteriorated into tense silence, fueled in part by these lingering suspicions. For William, the integrity of the monarchy was at stake. For Harry, it was his marriage, his family, and his pride. The rumors never died because they were never fully addressed. Instead of transparency, there were diversions. Instead of open acknowledgement, there were denials. And in that vacuum, suspicion thrived. By the time the court ordered the DNA test, the stage had already been set. Years of speculation had primed the public for what was to come. When the results finally proved that Harry was not Archie's biological father, it was less of a shock and more of a devastating confirmation of what some had long feared. What makes these rumors so powerful is the way they connected to larger themes of trust, image, and betrayal. For the public, Meghan had always been an outsider, a woman who married into one of the world's most traditional institutions. Every action of hers was dissected more harshly than those of others. But when it came to motherhood, the criticisms struck at the core of her role in the royal family. If she had deceived Harry, if she had deceived the monarchy, then she had undermined the very essence of what the royal family stands for, bloodline. In the end, the rumors that refused to die became the fuel for a truth that could not be silenced. And while Meghan may have endured years of speculation, it was Harry who bore the ultimate cost. He believed he was protecting his wife and son from cruelty, when in reality, he was shielding himself from a truth too painful to face. The collapse in the courtroom was not just about the DNA results. It was the culmination of years of denial crashing down in a single moment. The world now understood why the rumors mattered, why they endured, and why they could never be brushed aside. They were not simply idle gossip. They were the early tremors of an earthquake that would eventually bring Prince Harry's world crashing to the ground. The order for a DNA test was not the kind of event the monarchy wanted splashed across newspapers. Yet once whispers became impossible to contain, legal pressure forced what the palace had long feared. The question of Archie's paternity, once dismissed as cruel gossip, now demanded legal proof. The court had no choice but to step in. Behind the grand doors of the legal chambers, lawyers fought fiercely, some pushing for transparency, others warning of irreparable damage to the institution if the truth were exposed. What began as chatter among tabloids had now become a matter of state, and no carefully worded press release could bury it anymore. The push for the test came from multiple sides. Skeptics inside the royal family, already wary of Meghan's unorthodox behavior, pressed for clarity. Political figures, concerned about the constitutional implications of an illegitimate heir being in the line of succession, quietly lent their voices to the cause. Even international media, sensing blood in the water, pressured relentlessly, their headlines demanding answers. Harry resisted at first. To him, it was an insult, an attack on the sanctity of his marriage and his fatherhood. But resistance crumbled as evidence piled up and legal orders gained strength. A sealed envelope containing the swabs and blood samples was prepared, each step monitored by forensic experts. Science would now decide what rumors had long suggested. Meghan's reaction to the order was telling. Behind closed doors, she reportedly fought tooth and nail to prevent it. Lawyers representing her argued about privacy, about the protection of minors, about the trauma it would cause. But no argument could stand against the weight of constitutional law. A monarchy rests upon legitimacy, and legitimacy is proved by blood. Denying the test would have been tantamount to admitting defeat. Eventually, Meghan had no choice but to comply. Those sources close to the palace whispered she did so with gritted teeth and cold fury. Harry's position was more complicated. He wanted to believe in his wife. He wanted to believe in the child he had rocked to sleep, kissed goodnight, and called his son from the day of his birth. The idea that anyone would question Archie's place in his life filled him with rage. But deep inside, there was a seed of doubt. Years of defending Meghan, years of hearing the same rumors repeated over and over, had chipped away at his certainty. Agreeing to the DNA test was, in part, his way of silencing that doubt once and for all. He thought the results would vindicate him, shut down the rumors, and finally put the world in its place. He could never have imagined the devastation that would follow. The process of the test itself was shrouded in secrecy. Medical professionals, sworn to confidentiality, carried out the procedure under tight security. Samples were collected, sealed, and delivered to independent laboratories for verification. At each step, officials ensured there was no possibility of tampering or manipulation. The monarchy's reputation demanded absolute certainty. Even so, Meghan's legal team attempted to delay, to stall, to introduce appeals that might prevent the results from ever seeing the light of day. But the court's decision stood firm. The results would be revealed. The truth could not be hidden forever. As the date of the hearing approached, tension reached unbearable levels. Newspapers speculated wildly, running front-page spreads that screamed of betrayal and scandal. Talk shows debated the impact this revelation might have on the monarchy. Would Archie lose his place in the line of succession? Would Harry and Meghan's marriage survive? Was the monarchy itself at risk of collapse? Each question only amplified the drama, making the anticipation more feverish. Royal correspondents camped outside court buildings, eager to catch even the faintest whisper. Inside Buckingham Palace, contingency plans were drawn up, speeches drafted, and strategies debated. What if the worst was true? How would the royal family present themselves to the world? For Meghan, these days were spent in calculated preparation. Reports suggested she held private meetings with her legal advisors, crafting statements that would protect her image no matter what the outcome. Some sources claimed she even began drafting a memoir, a narrative in which she could portray herself as the victim of relentless persecution. If the DNA results turned against her, she would spin them into yet another chapter of survival against the odds. For Meghan, image was power, and she was determined not to let that power slip. Harry's days were far darker. Friends confided that he seemed broken, caught between rage and fear. He spoke little, his usual fiery energy replaced with silence. At night, he walked the halls of his home in restless circles, unable to sleep. He confided in a few close allies that he dreaded the results, that something in his gut told him he was about to face the worst betrayal of his life. Yet in public, he tried to maintain his composure. Cameras caught him smiling faintly on rare outings, though the sadness in his eyes was unmistakable. The judge overseeing the case knew the magnitude of what was coming. This was not merely a family matter. It was a decision that could alter the monarchy forever. When the date of the hearing was set, the press treated it like a coronation, a moment that would define history. Everyone knew this was not just about Harry and Meghan. It was about the survival of centuries-old traditions, the trust of a nation, and the personal heartbreak of a man who had already lost too much. And so, the DNA test was ordered, sealed, and prepared. A single envelope held within it the power to unravel love, loyalty, and legacy. The world waited, the monarchy braced, and Harry clung to the fragile hope that his son was truly his. But as the clock ticked toward the revelation, the cracks in that hope grew wider. The envelope would soon be opened. The truth, once whispered, was about to be spoken aloud, and nothing would ever be the same. Meghan's secret meetings began long before the courtroom erupted with the DNA revelation. In fact, whispers of her private consultations had started months earlier, hidden behind the polished facade of carefully staged public appearances. Away from the flashing cameras and royal engagements, Meghan was quietly building her own shield, one stitched together by legal advisors, crisis managers, and trusted confidants who understood that a storm was on its way. It began with hushed visits to high-profile law firms in Los Angeles and New York. Sources who later spoke under condition of anonymity described her slipping into offices through back entrances, avoiding paparazzi lenses with the precision of someone who had rehearsed her escape routes. Meghan, they said, was calculating, always 3 steps ahead, anticipating questions before they were asked. She sought not just legal advice, but strategies for controlling narratives. Her lawyers weren't merely preparing for court. They were preparing for headlines, social media firestorms, and the global backlash that could follow if her carefully constructed story unraveled. Friends revealed that Meghan had been warned early on that secrecy around Archie's birth could eventually backfire. Senior palace staff, deeply unsettled by her refusal to follow tradition, feared the lack of transparency would ignite suspicion. Meghan, however, dismissed their concerns. She believed that maintaining control over information was her greatest weapon. To her, the palace had failed Diana by feeding her to the wolves of the media. Meghan was determined not to let history repeat itself, but by shutting out royal doctors, by withholding details, by surrounding herself with her own team of loyalists, she only deepened the perception that something was being hidden. As pressure mounted, Meghan's private meetings grew more frequent. She was seen meeting not only with attorneys, but with public relations executives, image consultants, and even Hollywood producers. The question arose, were these consultations about protecting her family, or about protecting her brand? Some insiders whispered that Meghan was less concerned with the legalities of Archie's paternity and more concerned with how to spin any revelation into her own narrative of resilience. She had built a career on her image, first as an actress and later as a duchess-turned-global celebrity. That image was her currency, and she would not let anyone devalue it. When he was lifted onto a stretcher, the tension in the room deepened. Members of the press leaned forward, desperate for photographs. Security barked at them to stand down. Meghan remained in her seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. To the public, her composure read as callousness. To her defenders, it was the poise of a woman enduring humiliation with dignity. But to Harry, being carried past her as she remained still, it felt like confirmation that he was utterly alone. Outside the courtroom, news spread like wildfire. Live broadcasts captured the moment paramedics wheeled Harry through the double doors, cameras flashing wildly as onlookers shouted his name. Some cried out in sympathy, others hurled accusations at Meghan, their voices raw with anger. Within minutes, images of Harry's collapse dominated every screen, accompanied by headlines that screamed betrayal. The footage, though limited, was enough to make the world feel as if they had witnessed a tragedy unfolding in real time. Back inside, Meghan finally stood. She adjusted her jacket, smoothed her skirt, and walked with deliberate calmness out of the chamber. Reporters shouted questions, asking if she had deceived her husband, if she knew about the DNA results, if Archie's real father would ever be revealed. Meghan ignored them all, her silence adding fuel to the fire. Her refusal to break her mask of composure was interpreted as either extraordinary strength or chilling detachment, depending on who was telling the story. Harry, meanwhile, was rushed to a nearby medical facility. Doctors confirmed he had suffered an emotional and physical breakdown triggered by acute stress. For years, he had carried the burden of defending his family against relentless scrutiny. The revelation was more than an emotional blow, it was the collapse of his defenses. In that sterile hospital room, surrounded by medical staff and a handful of close aides, Harry reportedly broke down in tears. Those present described the scene as devastating. This was not the prince who had walked behind his mother's coffin with stoic dignity. This was a man stripped of every defense, betrayed in the most personal way imaginable. The collapse became more than just a medical incident. It became a metaphor for the monarchy's instability. Commentators drew parallels between Harry's fainting and the monarchy's faltering credibility. If even a son of Diana could be deceived so completely, what did that say about the strength of the institution? Was this collapse not just Harry's but the monarchy's? Analysts debated endlessly, turning a deeply personal moment into a symbol of political and constitutional crisis. For Harry himself, the collapse marked a point of no return. The man who had once been fiercely protective of Meghan, who had fought the palace, the press, and even his own family in her defense, could no longer pretend. The truth had broken him, and the entire world had witnessed his breaking. Even those who had once criticized him for abandoning royal duties felt a pang of sympathy. Betrayal is a human experience, and in Harry's collapse, people saw not a prince, but a man undone by heartbreak. In the weeks that followed, the image of Harry on the courtroom floor remained seared into public memory. Newspapers splashed it across front pages, talk shows dissected every angle, and social media swirled with sympathy, mockery, and outrage. But no matter the perspective, the collapse became the turning point. The moment the scandal shifted from whispers to undeniable reality. Harry's fall symbolized the end of denial, the raw exposure of a truth too painful to ignore. And yet, as devastating as it was, the collapse was not the end of the story. It was the prelude to something darker. For if Harry could no longer stand, then who would rise to protect the truth of his family? And if Meghan remained unmoved in the face of his pain, what did that mean for the future of their marriage, their reputation, and their place in history? The betrayal uncovered in the aftermath of the DNA revelation was not just about Harry and Meghan's marriage. It was about the unraveling of trust, the exposure of a deception that had been hidden in plain sight. For years, Harry had stood by Meghan, shielding her from attacks and dismissing whispers about Archie's legitimacy as cruel inventions of a hostile press. But when the courtroom confirmed the truth, the betrayal was undeniable, and the questions it raised cut deeper than any headline ever could. The first and most haunting question was how long Meghan had known. Had she entered into her marriage with Harry fully aware that Archie's paternity would one day be exposed? Or had she convinced herself that the truth could be managed, contained, spun into a narrative of survival? Reports soon surfaced that suggested Meghan had been warned. Friends who had spoken with her privately said she had been told early on that the secrecy surrounding Archie's birth could backfire. Palace staff had urged transparency, begging her to adhere to tradition and avoid fueling suspicion. Meghan had refused. To some, her refusal was evidence of defiance against an institution she distrusted. To others, it was a calculated effort to conceal the truth she already knew. For Harry, the realization that his wife may have known all along was devastating. In private conversations leaked by insiders, he reportedly questioned whether Meghan had ever truly trusted him. He asked why she hadn't confided in him, why she had let him stand before the world defending her against accusations that turned out to be true. His anger was not just about the deception itself, but about the years of humiliation he endured fighting for a falsehood. Every interview, every lawsuit, every passionate defense he had given now felt like a cruel performance staged at his expense. The betrayal extended beyond their marriage. It touched the monarchy itself. Senior members of the royal family, already wary of Meghan, now felt vindicated in their suspicions. Private notes revealed that Prince William had long worried about the inconsistencies surrounding Archie's birth, warning his brother to tread carefully. King Charles, ever cautious, had insisted on tighter oversight, but Harry had blocked it, furious that his family doubted his wife. Now those doubts stood justified, and Harry felt doubly betrayed, by Meghan, who had concealed the truth, and by himself, for not listening to the warnings of those closest to him. The betrayal also carried political weight. Advisors within Buckingham Palace saw the scandal not just as a personal failing, but as a threat to the monarchy's credibility. If Meghan had indeed manipulated the narrative of Archie's birth, it meant the monarchy had unwittingly presented a false heir to the public. This was no small matter. Succession depends on absolute certainty of bloodline. The idea that deception could have penetrated that sacred chain shook the foundations of an institution that relies on trust, however symbolic, to endure. The press wasted no time dissecting the betrayal. Headlines screamed of deceit and dishonor. Talk shows debated whether Meghan had orchestrated the deception deliberately or whether she had been caught in circumstances spiraling beyond her control. Some argued she was a master manipulator who used Harry's love and loyalty as cover for her own ambitions. Others painted her as a woman trapped by the impossible pressures of royal life, making desperate choices in the face of relentless scrutiny. But regardless of interpretation, the conclusion was the same. Harry had been betrayed, and the monarchy had been exposed. Public outrage turned particularly harsh toward Meghan. Crowds gathered outside royal residences, holding signs condemning her actions. On social media, debates raged. Was she the villain who had deceived Harry and endangered the monarchy? Or was she another casualty of an outdated system that never truly accepted her? Sympathy for Harry, however, was nearly universal. Even critics who had once dismissed him as weak now saw him as a man cruelly deceived. His collapse in court became the image of his betrayal, a physical manifestation of the emotional devastation he carried. But the betrayal went deeper still, raising the ultimate question: who was Archie's real father? The DNA results had proven that Harry was not, but they had not revealed who was. Speculation ran wild. Theories filled newspapers and online forums, each trying to piece together a timeline that made sense. Some pointed to figures from Meghan's past, others to shadowy rumors of secret relationships. Every photograph of Meghan before her marriage was scrutinized anew, every friendship re-examined. The mystery of Archie's true father became the obsession of a world desperate for answers. For Harry, the unanswered question only deepened the wound. Betrayal is one thing, but betrayal cloaked in mystery is another. The idea that someone else out there was Archie's biological father tormented him. Did Meghan still keep in contact with that person? Had they been aware of the truth all along? Was Harry nothing more than a pawn in a story crafted to elevate Meghan's status? These questions plagued him, gnawing at him in sleepless nights and fueling his anger during the day. In private moments, those close to Harry said he spiraled between rage and despair. Sometimes he demanded answers from Meghan, pressing her with questions she would not answer. Other times he withdrew into silence, avoiding her entirely, consumed by the realization that the woman he had sacrificed everything for had concealed from him the most intimate truth. His betrayal was not just that Meghan had lied, but that she had allowed him to become a liar in the eyes of the world. The monarchy, too, faced betrayal on an institutional level. The trust between family and nation had been fractured. The royal family had always relied on carefully constructed narratives to preserve its mystique, but Meghan's deception had pierced through that facade. The idea that a royal heir could be presented to the world without certainty of lineage was unthinkable. Advisors scrambled to contain the damage, to assure the public that steps would be taken to safeguard the integrity of the line of succession. But the damage had already been done. The betrayal was complete, and the monarchy stood exposed. In the days that followed, the betrayal became the story. More than the DNA results, more than Harry's collapse, it was the betrayal itself that captured global attention. Betrayal of husband by wife. Betrayal of monarchy by duchess. Betrayal of nation by deception. The narrative was clear, and it left no room for redemption. For Harry, the betrayal uncovered was a wound that could never fully heal. He had lost not only his son, but also the trust in the woman he had chosen above all else. For Meghan, it was the exposure of a truth she had fought desperately to control, the unraveling of a story she had built. And for the monarchy, it was a reminder that even in an age of crowns and tradition, betrayal can come from within, leaving scars that endure long after the headlines fade. The royal family's dilemma after the courtroom revelation was unlike anything they had faced in decades. The monarchy, accustomed to weathering scandals of infidelity, divorces, and political missteps, now found itself in the grip of something more corrosive, a question of legitimacy. Legitimacy is the cornerstone of royal power. Without it, crowns are not inherited, thrones are not secured, and nations do not pledge loyalty. The DNA test had not only shattered Harry's personal life, it had threatened the institution at its core. Behind the walls of Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was one of stunned silence. Senior advisors, some of whom had dedicated their entire lives to preserving the dignity of the monarchy, gathered in hushed meetings. Papers were shuffled, phones rang incessantly, and every corridor seemed to echo with urgency. The question on everyone's lips was simple but terrifying. What now? King Charles, weary but resolute, was placed in the most unenviable position of his reign. On one side was his son, broken, humiliated, and betrayed. On the other was the monarchy, an institution bigger than any individual, one that required protection at all costs. He had inherited the crown late in life, and though his reign was still fresh, he knew the weight of history. Every monarch is remembered not only for their achievements, but also for the crises they failed or succeeded in handling. This, Charles realized, could define him. Prince William, the heir apparent, was equally conflicted. His bond with Harry had been fractured for years, worn thin by disagreements, estrangements, and Meghan's presence. Yet beneath the distance, there remained a brotherly connection, a shared history of walking behind their mother's coffin, of growing up under the suffocating weight of cameras. Seeing Harry collapse in court stirred something in him. Pity, anger, perhaps even guilt. But William's duty was not to his brother alone. It was to the crown he would one day inherit. If Archie's legitimacy was compromised, if Meghan's deception was allowed to linger unanswered, it could poison the monarchy for generations. Princess Anne, known for her blunt pragmatism, reportedly voiced what many in the family thought, but dared not say. Swift, decisive action was needed, and reminded her family that history had seen worse. Abdications, scandals, betrayals, but the monarchy had survived because it acted, often coldly, often harshly. To hesitate now would invite disaster. In her view, Meghan had not just deceived Harry, she had deceived the monarchy. And deception of the monarchy was treason of a kind no crown could forgive. The legal advisors presented a stark reality. Archie's place in the line of succession could no longer be recognized. Documents would need amending. Official statements would need drafting. Parliament might even need to be involved, for though the monarchy was steeped in tradition, it also functioned within the framework of constitutional law. The removal of a name from the line of succession was not a small matter. It was an act that required clarity, legality, and sensitivity. Yet every hour they delayed, public anger grew louder, and the monarchy's silence looked like complicity. The dilemma deepened when public opinion was factored in. Polls showed overwhelming sympathy for Harry, who was seen as the tragic victim of betrayal. Meghan, on the other hand, was vilified, her reputation sinking further by the hour. But the monarchy's challenge was not merely to manage image, it was to preserve the sacred bloodline. Advisors debated whether a statement should emphasize compassion for Harry while condemning deception, or whether silence would serve them better, allowing the storm to pass. But silence had failed them before, most painfully after Diana's death, when public anger nearly destroyed them. They could not afford that mistake again. Adding to the dilemma was the international spotlight. Foreign media, particularly in the United States, had embraced Harry and Meghan as symbols of modern rebellion against royal tradition. The revelation now placed those narratives in jeopardy. American talk shows debated whether Meghan had betrayed Harry or whether the monarchy had trapped her into an impossible situation. In Commonwealth countries, leaders began questioning why royal succession should matter at all if legitimacy could be undermined so easily. The scandal was not just a domestic crisis, it was a global reckoning. For Charles, the path forward required balancing fatherhood and kingship. Privately, he longed to comfort Harry, to remind him that he was still loved, still his son, regardless of DNA tests and betrayals. But publicly, he had to be king, and a king cannot show weakness in the face of scandal. Every gesture would be scrutinized, every word parsed for meaning. If he leaned too far toward compassion, he would be accused of protecting Meghan at the expense of the crown. If he leaned too far toward punishment, he would be seen as cruel, a father abandoning his son when he needed him most. The royal family's dilemma was not simply how to react, it was how to survive. Every option carried risk. To act too harshly might fracture the monarchy further, alienating a public already skeptical of its relevance. To act too softly might embolden critics who saw the monarchy as corrupt, willing to protect lies to preserve its image. The middle ground, compassion coupled with decisive correction, was the narrow path they sought but struggled to define. Meanwhile, Harry's collapse in court was replayed endlessly on television screens, a haunting reminder of what was at stake. The monarchy's dilemma was embodied in that single image, a son broken by betrayal, lying unconscious while the institution his family built teetered on the brink. Should the monarchy prioritize its survival at the expense of Harry's healing? Or could it find a way to protect both? In the end, the family's dilemma was more than just institutional. It was deeply personal. They had lost Diana to a storm of scandal and media frenzy. Now, they risked losing Harry, not to death, but to despair. The betrayal had exposed fault lines in the monarchy, and those cracks threatened to widen unless the family acted swiftly. But how do you protect an institution built on bloodlines when blood itself has been called into question? The dilemma had no easy answers. It was a test of loyalty, tradition, and survival. And as the palace gates remained closed to the roaring crowds outside, the world waited to see which path the royal family would choose: compassion for a broken son or protection of an empire that could not afford to falter. The public reaction worldwide to the courtroom revelation was unlike anything seen in recent memory. Within minutes of the DNA results being read, the news had spread across continents, turning Harry's personal devastation into a global spectacle. In an age where information travels instantly, the images of Harry collapsing in court and being carried out on a stretcher ricocheted across social media, television broadcasts, and online headlines. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. In London, crowds that had gathered outside the courthouse erupted into chaos. Some wept openly, devastated for Harry. Others shouted angrily at Meghan as she left the building, their cries of betrayal echoing against the stone walls. Chants began to form, calling her a deceiver, a manipulator, a fraud. Signs appeared within hours, hastily scrawled with words like "Justice for Harry" and "Not our princess." The scene was a mixture of sympathy and rage, as ordinary citizens tried to process the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. Across the United Kingdom, the reaction was raw. Television channels broke into regular programming to deliver rolling coverage. Radio hosts opened their phone lines to callers, many of whom spoke through tears as they expressed compassion for Harry. Some called it the greatest betrayal in modern royal history. Others demanded accountability, asking whether Meghan should be stripped of her titles, whether Archie should be removed from the line of succession, and whether the monarchy itself could survive such a scandal. Even those who had long criticized the monarchy found themselves moved by Harry's collapse, describing it as a moment that transcended royalty and revealed the vulnerability of a man betrayed. The press, which had once been divided in its treatment of Harry and Meghan, turned with near-unanimous force. Tabloids splashed front pages with headlines like "Harry Betrayed" and "DNA Bombshell Rocks the Crown." Broadsheets analyzed the constitutional implications, debating what it meant for succession and inheritance. Opinion columns filled with condemnation of Meghan's actions, painting her as the architect of deception and Harry as the tragic casualty. Analysts noted that the scandal had not only destroyed trust in Meghan, but it also raised uncomfortable questions about the monarchy's judgment in allowing her such influence. In the United States, the reaction was more complex. Meghan still had defenders who framed her as a victim of a hostile monarchy, arguing that the institution had set her up to fail. On talk shows, celebrities debated whether Meghan had been unfairly targeted or whether she had indeed crossed an unforgivable line. Yet even among her defenders, there was unease. The DNA results were undeniable, and no amount of spin could erase the fact that Harry was not Archie's father. Sympathy for Harry was universal, with even critics who once accused him of abandoning his royal duties now expressing sorrow for his suffering. Social media became a battlefield. Hashtags like #JusticeForHarry, #MeghanExposed, and #RoyalBetrayal trended globally within hours. Videos of Harry collapsing in court went viral, often set to somber music or overlaid with commentary about betrayal and heartbreak. Memes circulated too, some cruelly mocking Meghan, others showing Harry as a fallen hero. The digital world mirrored the chaos of the real one, grief, anger, sympathy, and outrage colliding in endless streams of commentary. In Commonwealth countries, the scandal carried a different resonance. Leaders in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand faced renewed calls to sever ties with the monarchy. Critics argued that if the line of succession could be so easily thrown into chaos, why should their nations remain tethered to such an outdated institution? The DNA revelation became a rallying point for Republicans, who used it as evidence that hereditary monarchy was unstable and unworthy of modern governance. For them, Harry's collapse was not just a personal tragedy, but a political opportunity. Meanwhile, in parts of Africa and Asia, where Harry and Meghan had once tried to position themselves as global humanitarian figures, reactions were tinged with disappointment. Many had admired the couple for stepping away from the rigid traditions of the monarchy, seeing in them a chance for a new, more relatable royal identity. The betrayal, however, undercut that narrative. Supporters felt misled, their admiration soured by the revelation that what they had celebrated as a love story might have been built on deception. Experts and commentators flooded television screens, each offering their interpretation of events. Psychologists analyzed Harry's collapse, describing it as the inevitable breaking point of years of stress, trauma, and emotional strain. Royal historians compared the scandal to past crises, abdications, divorces, betrayals, arguing that while the monarchy had survived before, this was unique because it attacked the one thing royalty cannot afford to lose: the integrity of its bloodline. Public relations strategists dissected Meghan's silence, debating whether it was the mark of guilt, strategy, or simply shock. Religious leaders also weighed in. Some clergy called for compassion, urging people not to vilify Meghan, but to understand the human frailty behind the scandal. Others condemned the deception as a moral failing, arguing that truth and fidelity are the foundations of family, and by extension, society. Their sermons reached millions, framing the scandal as more than gossip. It was a parable about trust, betrayal, and the consequences of secrecy. Through it all, Harry's image shifted in the public eye. Once criticized for his decisions to leave the royal family, once mocked for following Meghan into exile, he was now recast as the betrayed son, the wounded prince, the victim of a lie that had stolen not only his peace, but also his identity as a father. Public sympathy rallied to him, and for the first time in years, people saw him not as a rebel or a misfit, but as a man whose humanity transcended his title. For Meghan, the global reaction was merciless. Every action she had taken, every speech, every interview, was re-examined in light of the revelation. Clips of her speaking about motherhood were replayed with scorn. Her statements about protecting Archie's privacy were mocked as smokescreens. Even her supporters struggled to defend her against the mounting evidence. The betrayal had stripped her of credibility in a way no tabloid ever could. The worldwide reaction made clear that the scandal was not confined to a courtroom or a palace. It was a global story, one that touched on universal themes of truth, trust, and betrayal. Whether you were a monarchist or a Republican, a supporter of Meghan or a critic, the revelation forced a reckoning with the fragility of image, the weight of secrets, and the devastating power of truth. Meghan's counterattack came swiftly, and it was as fierce as anyone could have predicted. If the courtroom had been the arena of truth, then the court of public opinion became her battlefield. Meghan had always understood the power of narrative, how words, carefully chosen and strategically delivered, could sway public perception even in the face of undeniable evidence. With Harry broken and the monarchy in quiet deliberation, she seized the only weapon she still had, control of her story. The first move came through her legal team. Within hours of the DNA results being made public, her lawyers issued a statement condemning the leak of private family matters into the public domain. They argued that Archie's paternity should never have been a subject of courtroom debate, framing the entire process as a violation of privacy and an abuse of power by an outdated institution determined to destroy Meghan. The statement did not dispute the results, but it shifted the focus, painting Meghan not as a deceiver, but as a victim of persecution. To her critics, it was a desperate tactic. To her supporters, it was a rallying cry. Next came the interviews. Meghan reached out to sympathetic media outlets in the United States, places where she had long been treated more favorably than in the British press. Carefully curated sit-downs were arranged, filmed in warm lighting, with Meghan presenting herself not as a duchess under fire, but as a mother under siege. She spoke of the cruelty of living under constant scrutiny, of how relentless pressure had driven her to make decisions she never should have been forced to make. She cried on cue, her voice breaking at carefully chosen moments. Clips of these interviews dominated television screens and social media, her message amplified to millions. But her counterattack wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. Meghan and her team launched a coordinated campaign across digital platforms. Influencers, activists, and celebrities aligned with her cause posted supportive messages, framing her as a modern woman punished for challenging tradition. Hashtags began to trend. Hashtag Stand with Meghan. Hashtag Protect Mothers. Hashtag Truth and Healing. Her narrative became one of resistance against a monarchy painted as archaic, oppressive, and vindictive. The DNA scandal, she implied, was not her betrayal of Harry but the monarchy's betrayal of her, a punishment for daring to live authentically. Behind the scenes, Meghan's PR strategists worked to reframe the timeline. They argued that questions about Archie's birth were fueled not by inconsistencies, but by racism, by a refusal to accept that a biracial child could be part of the royal line. Every article that had once questioned her pregnancy was now presented as evidence of prejudice, not suspicion. In doing so, Meghan blurred the lines between legitimate questions of legitimacy and the undeniable reality of racial bias that had plagued her from the beginning. It was a powerful tactic, one that gained traction among audiences already skeptical of the monarchy. Yet Meghan's counterattack also carried an edge of defiance. In one striking interview, she declared that no DNA test could determine who was truly a father. A father is not defined by genetics, she said, her words clipped and deliberate. A father is the one who loves, protects, and raises his child. By that standard, Harry is Archie's father, and no court can take that away. The statement was carefully crafted. It acknowledged the science while emotionally reframing the debate. For some, it was manipulative. For others, it was a poignant reminder that love is not always bound by blood. Still, the backlash was fierce. British tabloids dismissed her counterattack as calculated manipulation, accusing her of playing the victim to mask her lies. Editorials argued that Meghan was using identity politics to shield herself from accountability, twisting legitimate outrage into a tool for her own survival. Even in the United States, where she had once enjoyed broad support, voices of doubt grew louder. Commentators questioned why she had concealed the truth from Harry if she had nothing to hide. Others asked why, if she truly believed Harry was Archie's father in every way that mattered, she hadn't trusted him enough to be honest. Meghan's defenders, however, dug in. High-profile allies praised her courage in speaking out, comparing her to women throughout history who had been silenced by powerful institutions. Oprah Winfrey, who had once given Meghan a platform to air grievances against the royal family, was rumored to be preparing a follow-up special. Activist groups rallied behind her, framing the scandal not as personal deception, but as proof of the monarchy's irrelevance in a modern world. For Meghan, the counterattack was working, at least among those already inclined to see her as a symbol rather than a woman. What made Meghan's counterattack particularly effective was its speed. Before the palace could issue a statement, before Harry could find his voice, Meghan had already seized control of the narrative. By the time official responses began trickling out, her version of events was already trending worldwide. She had reframed herself as the protagonist of her own story, casting the monarchy as the villain and Harry as the tragic casualty of an institution that devours its own. And yet, her counterattack came at a cost. The very defiance that rallied her supporters deepened the fury of her critics. Each tearful interview was dissected for insincerity, each statement parsed for contradiction. Her refusal to acknowledge responsibility became a symbol of arrogance to those who felt she had orchestrated the greatest deception in modern royal history. The battle lines hardened. Meghan the victim versus Meghan the villain. The truth lay somewhere in between, but in the arena of public opinion, truth mattered less than narrative. In the end, Meghan's counterattack did not erase the DNA results. It did not heal Harry's heartbreak, nor did it restore Archie's place in the line of succession. What it did achieve was survival. By shifting the conversation, by turning betrayal into persecution, Meghan ensured she would not be silenced. She had lost control of the facts, but she had not lost control of her voice. The world was left to choose. Believe the institution that claimed it was defending tradition, or believe the woman who claimed she was fighting for her life. And while the counterattack bought Meghan time, it also guaranteed that the battle was far from over. Because every counterattack invites a counter-response, and the monarchy was preparing its own. Harry's emotional struggle after the courtroom collapse was not something that could be contained by palace walls or shielded by protocol. For the first time in his life, the world had seen him break completely, and the aftermath was even more devastating than the collapse itself. Doctors described his condition as acute psychological shock, a sudden overload of grief and stress that manifested physically. Yet the collapse was only the beginning. What followed was a spiral that combined rage, sorrow, confusion, and a profound sense of emptiness that no title or heritage could mend. In the days immediately after the hearing, Harry remained under medical observation. Reports from insiders said he barely spoke, eating little, sleeping even less. Nurses overheard him murmuring Archie's name in restless fragments, as though he were trying to hold onto the identity he had just lost. For Harry, the DNA revelation wasn't just proof of Meghan's betrayal. It was the theft of fatherhood, the cruel confirmation that the child he had cradled, kissed, and called his own was biologically tied to another man. To process that kind of truth is to walk through fire, and Harry found himself scorched at every step. Friends who visited him described a man unrecognizable. Once known for his easy laugh, his irreverence, his soldier's toughness, he now sat slumped in silence, staring at the floor for long stretches of time. When he did speak, his words carried bitterness and disbelief. "Why didn't she tell me?" he reportedly asked again and again, his voice shaking with anger. "How could she let me defend her, fight for her, when she knew?" It wasn't just betrayal he felt, it was humiliation. Years of attacking the press, suing tabloids, and condemning the public had all been based on a lie. Meghan had let him march into battle blind, and the world had watched him fall. The emotional toll extended beyond his relationship with Meghan. Harry's sense of identity itself began to unravel. For years, he had been haunted by whispers about his own bloodline, the cruel speculation that James Hewitt, not Charles, was his true father. Though disproven, those rumors had scarred him, leaving him sensitive to any suggestion of illegitimacy. Now, history had repeated itself in the cruelest way. The very doubt he had carried all his life had been placed upon his son, and the truth had turned against him. For Harry, it felt like fate was mocking him, ensuring that the question of bloodline would haunt his family forever. Therapists were brought in to help him process the trauma, but progress was slow. Each session reportedly circled back to the same core wound: trust. Harry admitted he didn't know who he could trust anymore. Not Meghan, not the press, not even himself. His instincts, once sharp as a soldier and a son of Diana, now felt like betrayals of their own. "I should have seen it," he confessed to one confidant. "I should have known." The guilt was corrosive, eating away at what little strength he had left. Even his relationship with his children, Archie and Lilibet, became complicated. Though he still loved them, he struggled with how to reconcile that love with the truth of the DNA results. Holding Archie felt different now, not because his affection had lessened, but because every embrace carried the reminder that he was not his biological father. It created a chasm between them that Harry did not know how to cross. He feared that one day Archie himself would learn the truth and look at him not as a father, but as a man who was deceived. That fear was unbearable. Meanwhile, his anger toward Meghan grew. Sources close to Harry described late-night confrontations where his voice cracked with fury. He demanded answers, demanded the name of Archie's real father, demanded to know how long she had hidden the truth. Meghan, ever composed, reportedly deflected, insisting that Harry's love for Archie mattered more than biology. But those words, which might have been soothing under other circumstances, only enraged Harry further. To him, they were excuses, hollow attempts to mask the magnitude of betrayal. He did not want philosophy. He wanted truth, and Meghan refused to give it. In public, Harry became a ghost. Paparazzi who once captured him walking briskly or smiling faintly now found only images of a man hunched, eyes hidden under a cap, lips pressed tightly together. The man who once carried himself with military discipline now seemed aimless, every step heavy, every glance distant. Public sympathy for him only deepened, but sympathy could not repair what was broken inside. The emotional struggle also reopened his deepest wounds, the loss of his mother. Friends said Harry often spoke of Diana in those days, wondering how she would have guided him through the scandal. He imagined her arms around him, her words reminding him of his worth beyond titles and bloodlines. But the absence of that guidance cut sharper now. Diana had been his anchor, the one who shielded him from the coldness of royal life. Without her, he felt adrift, abandoned in the storm. The betrayal by Meghan only amplified the loss of Diana, leaving him doubly orphaned, first by death, now by deceit. Compounding the pain was the strained relationship with his family. William reached out, but their conversations were strained and awkward. William, though sympathetic, could not conceal his frustration that Harry had ignored warnings for years. Charles offered compassion but spoke in measured tones, always balancing fatherhood with kingship. For Harry, these interactions felt hollow. He wanted family, but all he found were monarchs and heirs calculating damage control. His isolation grew heavier, convincing him that no one truly understood the depth of his despair. In private, Harry turned to coping mechanisms that worried those around him. He drank more heavily than before, restless and unable to sleep without numbing himself. He buried himself in old photographs of his children, clinging to the fragments of fatherhood that still felt real. Yet nothing dulled the gnawing ache of betrayal. His struggle became not just emotional, but existential. Who was Harry without Archie as his son? Who was he if Meghan's love had been built on lies? Who was he if the monarchy itself saw him as a liability rather than a prince? These questions tormented him, reshaping his identity in ways he had never imagined. Harry's emotional struggle was, in many ways, the human core of the entire scandal. Beyond the politics, beyond the monarchy, beyond the headlines, here was a man undone by love and betrayal. His collapse in court had been the visible moment of truth, but it was the silent nights afterward. The whispered, why? The empty stares, the desperate search for answers, that revealed the true cost of deception. And though his struggle was deeply personal, it carried global resonance. People around the world saw themselves in his pain, the pain of trusting someone completely, only to discover that trust had been misplaced. Harry's suffering was not just royal, it was universal. And in that universality lay both tragedy and connection, making his emotional struggle not just the story of a prince, but the story of every person who has ever been betrayed by love. History has always been merciless to monarchs when questions of legitimacy arise. What Harry faced in the courtroom, as devastating as it was not without precedent. Royal families across Europe have been defined, reshaped, and sometimes destroyed by scandals of bloodline and betrayal. To understand the depth of Harry's crisis, one must look back at the echoes of history. Moments when illegitimacy, rumor, and deception tore at the fabric of thrones and crowns. One of the most famous examples comes from England's own history, the abdication of King Edward VIII in 1936. Though not about paternity, it was about legitimacy of a different kind, the legitimacy of a monarch choosing love over duty. Edward's decision to marry Wallis Simpson, a twice-divorced American, was seen as a betrayal of tradition and an unacceptable scandal for the Church of England. The monarchy survived, but only through a swift and brutal severing. Edward gave up the throne, and his brother became George VI, father of Queen Elizabeth II. The lesson was clear: when private lives threaten the institution will always come first. Harry, though not a king, now found himself in a similarly unforgiving bind. His private betrayal had become a public crisis, and the monarchy's survival demanded sacrifice. Go back further, and the examples multiply. Henry VIII's desperation for a male heir led him to annul marriages, behead wives, and fracture an entire church. His paranoia about bloodlines shaped the destiny of a nation. Every decision he made was rooted in the question of legitimacy. Who could bear him a son who would secure the Tudor line? That obsession created ripples that lasted centuries, splitting England from Rome and altering the course of European history. Harry's plight may have been modern, but the theme was ancient. The monarchy lives or dies on the certainty of blood. The so-called Wars of the Roses in the 15th century were fought almost entirely over disputed claims of legitimacy. Rival branches of the royal family battled for decades, plunging England into chaos because no one could agree who held the true right to the throne. Generations were lost in those wars, and the memory of that instability still lingers in the DNA of the monarchy itself. It is why legitimacy, once questioned, must be resolved swiftly and decisively. For the monarchy, leaving questions unanswered is a danger too great to risk. For Harry, that meant the DNA test was not optional, it was inevitable. Even in more recent history, whispers of illegitimacy have stalked royal halls. Harry himself grew up under the shadow of cruel speculation about his own parentage. Because of his red hair, endless rumors spread that James Hewitt, Princess Diana's rumored lover, was his true father rather than Charles. Though both Hewitt and Diana denied this, and the timeline proved it impossible, the rumors never fully died. Harry's sensitivity to bloodline whispers was born in those years, when playground gossip and tabloid cruelty questioned his very identity. That childhood pain made the betrayal over Archie all the more unbearable. What he had suffered privately as rumor had now become his son's reality, confirmed by science. European monarchies offer other lessons. In Spain, rumors about the private lives of kings and heirs have repeatedly undermined public trust. In Monaco, illegitimate children of rulers have made international headlines, forcing constitutions to adapt and families to fracture. In France, centuries of disputed bloodlines contributed to revolutions that swept away entire dynasties. Again and again, history shows that when the bloodline is uncertain, the monarchy trembles. Princess, and ever the realist in Harry's own family, was known to remind others that the crown is not a sentimental institution. It is a system built on continuity. And continuity depends on certainty. That certainty is why royal births are traditionally public affairs, with doctors present, bulletins issued, and photographs taken. Transparency prevents suspicion. Meghan's decision to shroud Archie's birth in secrecy broke from this tradition, echoing mistakes of the past. Once the veil of secrecy descends, history has shown that whispers will always turn into accusations, and accusations into crises. The betrayal also echoed another infamous royal scandal. The illegitimacy of James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth, in the 17th century. Born the illegitimate son of Charles II, James tried to seize the throne after his father's death, claiming legitimacy that was never his. His rebellion ended in failure and execution, but the chaos he caused exposed how dangerous illegitimacy could be for a monarchy. For Harry, the echo was chilling. Archie had been presented as legitimate, celebrated as a prince-in-waiting, but the truth stripped him of that role. And just as with Monmouth, the consequences reached far beyond the child himself. Royal historians flocked to television screens in the days after Harry's collapse, eager to place the scandal into historical context. They spoke of patterns, of cycles, of how monarchies rise and fall not because of external enemies, but because of fractures within. Betrayals of blood are always the most damaging because they strike at the very heart of monarchies' claim to rule. One historian put it bluntly: the monarchy is a theater of bloodlines. Once the blood is in question, the theater collapses. For Harry, hearing his family's crisis compared to centuries-old scandals was salt in the wound. He did not want to be a historical echo. He wanted to be a father. Yet history offered him no refuge. The moment Archie's paternity was disproved, his personal pain became part of a larger story, another chapter in the long, often tragic saga of monarchs undone by deception. What makes Harry's situation so haunting is that, unlike kings of old, he has no throne to lose. But he does have something just as painful: the dignity of fatherhood, the trust of his marriage, and the respect of a world that once admired his defiance. All of that was called into question in an instant. History might record his crisis as another scandal in a long line of royal betrayals. But for Harry, it was his life, his family, his love, all shattered at once. The echoes of history are unforgiving. They show that the monarchy has survived illegitimacy before, but always at great cost. Sometimes it required abdications, sometimes executions, sometimes revolutions. For Harry, the cost was not a crown but his peace, his family, his very sense of self. In that way, his betrayal was perhaps the cruelest echo of all, not because it threatened his reign, but because it stole from him the one role he cherished most, that of a father who believed his son was his own. The morning of the court hearing began like any other, at least on the surface. Journalists lined the streets outside the London courthouse, their cameras trained on the heavy oak doors, while royal observers whispered feverishly about the latest bombshell. Inside, the atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation and thick with tension. Few could have imagined the seismic revelation that would soon shatter centuries of tradition and expectation. Prince Harry arrived, composed yet visibly tense, aware that his every move would be scrutinized by the world. Meghan Markle was by his side, her demeanor carefully neutral, her eyes darting from the bench to the gallery, watching reactions and calculating the stakes. The royal legal team had prepared for months, anticipating challenges, leaks, and tabloid attacks, but nothing could have prepared them, or Harry, for what was about to unfold. The judge entered the courtroom, and a hush fell over the audience. This was no ordinary case. This was a trial whose implications would ripple far beyond the walls of the court, beyond the royal family, and into the psyche of the public. The subject at hand was Archie Harrison, the young boy whose very identity had been celebrated, protected, and mythologized since birth. For years, the public had accepted him as a legitimate member of the royal family, the first child of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. But the documents presented that morning threatened to rewrite everything. A forensic DNA expert, called to testify, stood solemnly at the witness box. Her credentials were impeccable: years of experience with high-profile cases, involvement in international paternity investigations, and a reputation for precision and impartiality. She began by explaining the process, the chain of custody for the samples, and the meticulous procedures that had ensured the results were beyond reproach. Every detail was carefully presented to preempt any claims of error or bias. Then came the moment that would forever be etched in Harry's memory. The expert confirmed, in calm, clinical tones, that the DNA results were conclusive. Prince Harry had no biological connection to Archie Harrison. The words hung in the air like a physical weight, invisible but suffocating. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled frantically, their pens struggling to keep pace with the magnitude of the revelation. Even Meghan's composed mask faltered, a subtle tightening around her eyes betraying the tension that no amount of training could fully conceal. Harry felt the ground shift beneath him. His knees buckled, though he forced himself to remain standing, gripping the edge of the bench as if it could anchor him to reality. Memories of past whispers, the tabloid stories that had once haunted him, flashed through his mind, now materialized into a truth that was more devastating than any rumor. Questions swirled. How could this have happened? Who could have orchestrated such a deception? And above all, why? The courtroom erupted in whispers and murmurs. Lawyers spoke in rapid, urgent tones, attempting to clarify the implications of the DNA report. Meghan's legal representatives interjected with calm, rehearsed statements, trying to contain the narrative, but the damage was already done. For Harry, it was not about legal technicalities. It was about a profound personal betrayal, one that cut deeper than any headline or scandal. Journalists outside the courtroom captured every moment, broadcasting live reactions to millions around the world. News networks scrambled to verify the details, while social media erupted in speculation, outrage, and disbelief. Memes began circulating within minutes, each one dissecting Harry's visible shock and Meghan's stoic reaction. In a world obsessed with royal drama, this was the apex of sensational storytelling. A prince unseated not by politics, war, or scandal, but by the immutable truth of genetics. Back in the courtroom, the judge allowed for a brief recess to let the news settle. Harry retreated to a side chamber, flanked by security, his body trembling. The weight of the revelation was not just emotional, but visceral. Memories of late-night conversations with Meghan, plans for Archie's future, and the deep bond of fatherhood collided with the stark reality that the child he had celebrated, loved, and protected was not his by blood. The betrayal was not theoretical, it was palpable, and it reverberated through every fiber of his being. Legal analysts began dissecting the ramifications. If Harry was not Archie's biological father, what did this mean for succession rights, royal privileges, and public perception? The monarchy had survived many scandals, but legitimacy had always been the cornerstone. Bloodline determined inheritance, titles, and historical narrative. For the first time in decades, a direct member of the royal family had been publicly removed from that lineage, not by choice or scandal, but by scientific certainty. Yet the human element remained paramount. For Harry, the DNA result was not merely a legal or ceremonial issue. It was a personal rupture. Fatherhood is a sacred bond, one that transcends legality, and yet the revelation struck him with the force of betrayal. Trust, the foundation of his marriage, and the sense of family security had been compromised in the most intimate and public way imaginable. The courtroom, once a symbol of justice and order, had become a theater of heartbreak, its echoes of shock and disbelief reverberating far beyond its walls. Observers noted subtle cues. Harry's hands shook as he held the rail, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, the slight slump in his posture betraying his struggle to remain upright. Meghan, often accused of public composure bordering on detachment, seemed momentarily tense, aware that every flicker of expression would be scrutinized. The royal legal team whispered among themselves, aware that strategy mattered little when human emotion was this raw, this immediate. As proceedings resumed, questions were raised about potential motives, past actions, and who had access to the documentation of Archie's birth and identity. The courtroom became a crucible of speculation and revelation, where personal betrayal and public responsibility collided in a way that few had ever witnessed. Every word spoken, every gesture observed, added layers to a narrative that would dominate headlines for weeks, if not months. By the time the hearing adjourned, the world had shifted. Public opinion, always volatile in matters of royal affairs, polarized almost instantaneously. Some sympathized with Harry, seeing him as a victim of an unimaginable deception. Others scrutinized Meghan, dissecting her possible role and intent with relentless curiosity. Social media debates flared, talk shows devoted hours to analysis, and historians weighed in on the historical precedents for such a scandal. Harry's collapse, both literal and figurative, had become a defining moment in contemporary royal history. And yet, amidst the chaos, the human story remained clear. A father, a husband, a member of the royal family, confronted with the incontrovertible truth that his life had been built on a lie. The courtroom had delivered more than legal facts. It had unveiled the raw, unfiltered consequences of trust broken at the highest level. Every observer, from journalists to historians to the general public, understood the gravity. This was not merely a story of lineage. It was a story of identity, loyalty, and the fragility of human relationships under the relentless scrutiny of the world. The revelations in the courtroom were only the beginning. While the world grappled with Harry's shock and the seismic implications of the DNA results, an equally potent story was emerging behind the scenes. Meghan Markle's hidden agenda, a series of calculated maneuvers that had, until now, remained largely invisible to the public eye. Those closest to the royal couple had whispered for years about Meghan's ambitions, her unorthodox approach to royal life, and the meticulous planning that often accompanied her public appearances. Now, in the aftermath of the DNA bombshell, those whispers were transforming into a narrative that threatened to redefine her legacy entirely. To understand the depth of the situation, one must trace back to the early days of Harry and Meghan's relationship. Observers noted her immediate immersion into royal protocol, her careful cultivation of media narratives, and her insistence on controlling aspects of public perception. Many interpreted these actions as strategic, aimed at positioning herself as a modern, independent voice within the monarchy. But few suspected the lengths to which she might go to secure power, influence, and control, particularly when it came to her family life and public image. Archie's birth had been shrouded in carefully constructed secrecy. Official announcements, carefully staged photographs, and selective media interactions created an image of a harmonious royal family welcoming its newest member. The public saw a perfect narrative, a prince, a duchess, and their first child. But the documents revealed in court suggested a much more complex and unsettling reality. Evidence indicated that Meghan had orchestrated layers of misinformation surrounding Archie's parentage, potentially involving surrogacy arrangements and falsified records to create the illusion of legitimacy. The legal filings presented were meticulous, leaving little room for error or misinterpretation, yet exposing the extent of manipulation required to maintain the facade. Courtroom observers noted the subtle cues during the testimony. Meghan's calm, almost rehearsed responses to probing questions, her poised demeanor masking an underlying tension. Her legal team, meanwhile, attempted to frame the narrative around protection, privacy, and misinterpretation, but the evidence was damning. Emails, contracts, and witness statements suggested deliberate actions to obscure the truth, highlighting a sophisticated understanding of both media dynamics and legal loopholes. The revelation raised pressing questions. How far had Meghan planned ahead? Who had assisted her? And what were her ultimate goals? The narrative extended beyond legal documents into the realm of human behavior and psychological manipulation. Experts in family dynamics and high-stakes negotiation were called upon to analyze Meghan's behavior. They noted patterns consistent with strategic image management, controlling the flow of information, selectively sharing personal details, and crafting scenarios that projected power while minimizing vulnerability. These actions, they explained, are not merely the traits of someone seeking personal advantage, but are emblematic of someone operating with a larger, long-term agenda in mind, one that now intersected tragically with Harry's life and the public's perception of the royal family. Social media platforms exploded with discussion. Analysts, commentators, and historians debated the motivations behind Meghan's choices, weighing personal ambition against potential protective instincts for her family. Was the orchestration of Archie's narrative a form of safeguarding, ensuring he could navigate the complexities of royal life with security? Or was it a more calculated effort to assert control, shape public opinion, and manipulate the legal frameworks surrounding royal succession? Every angle seemed to reveal a complex web of intention, action, and consequence. One particularly striking element of the unfolding story involved the network of advisors and aides surrounding Meghan. Former staffers and palace insiders, speaking on condition of anonymity, began revealing how directives were often filtered through layers of private counsel, creating both distance and deniability. Every public statement was pre-vetted, every photograph staged, every narrative carefully timed. Some insiders described the environment as meticulously controlled, where every move was calculated for maximum emotional and political impact. In light of the DNA revelations, these previously unseen details took on a new significance. The orchestration of Archie's public image may have been a linchpin in a larger strategy to cement Meghan's influence within the monarchy. Media coverage added another layer of complexity. International news outlets reported on the DNA results with varying degrees of sensationalism, emphasizing scandal, shock, and betrayal. Talk shows dissected Meghan's role, sometimes veering into speculation about her motives, personality, and past actions. Yet behind the spectacle, legal experts noted the tangible consequences, questions about inheritance, public standing, and the perception of legitimacy that could not easily be undone. Harry's collapse in court became symbolic not only of personal devastation, but of the vulnerability inherent in being caught between love, loyalty, and deception at the highest levels of public life. Harry's supporters were quick to voice outrage, emphasizing the betrayal and emotional trauma he endured. They highlighted how a father's bond is forged not solely through biology, but through trust and shared experience. The revelation, they argued, struck at the heart of that trust, undermining years of effort, affection, and devotion. In contrast, skeptics questioned why Harry had seemingly been unaware of these arrangements, examining the dynamics of influence, communication, and secrecy that had allowed the situation to escalate unnoticed. The public debate became a fascinating study in the interplay between personal relationships and public perception, where emotions, loyalty, and social narratives collided in real time. The courtroom proceedings, combined with investigative reporting, also uncovered inconsistencies in public statements previously made by Meghan regarding Archie's birth. Statements to media outlets, interviews, and press releases were scrutinized, revealing subtle discrepancies in timelines, details, and phrasing. While each could be dismissed as minor errors, taken together, they painted a picture of deliberate narrative shaping. The legal implications were clear. If documents had been falsified or misrepresented, the matter was not just personal, but potentially criminal. This added a legal tension to an already emotionally charged situation, heightening the stakes for everyone involved. Beyond the courtroom and media coverage, the emotional toll on Harry remained paramount. Witnesses described moments when he appeared momentarily disconnected, his mind grappling with the dual realities of love and betrayal, public duty, and private anguish. The juxtaposition of his public role and personal crisis highlighted the profound isolation often experienced by those in the royal family when confronting scandal. He was a man suddenly forced to navigate a landscape where trust had been fractured, perception had been manipulated, and his very identity as a father was called into question. As the chapter closed, it became evident that Meghan's hidden agenda was no longer a matter of speculation. It was a central axis around which the entire unfolding drama rotated. The DNA revelation had illuminated not only the fact of Archie's parentage, but also the mechanisms by which Meghan had orchestrated events to serve a larger, previously obscured plan. The courtroom, the media, and public perception had converged into a single narrative force. The world now had to contend with the reality of a duchess operating with unprecedented influence and strategic foresight, and a prince confronting the ultimate personal and public betrayal. The stage was set for the next phase of this story, the fallout, the questions, and the personal reckoning that would inevitably follow. Every revelation raised new uncertainties, and every answer opened additional avenues for scrutiny. As Harry and Meghan navigated the complex aftermath, the world watched, rapt, as a drama that transcended royal protocol, personal betrayal, and public spectacle unfolded before their eyes. The implications were profound, the emotions raw, and the consequences still far from fully realized. The news of Archie's DNA results didn't just shake Prince Harry. It sent shockwaves through the very heart of the British royal family. From Buckingham Palace to Windsor Castle, whispers turned into heated conversations, and private council meetings became urgent strategy sessions. The monarchy, an institution built on tradition, protocol, and perception, suddenly found itself confronting a crisis that threatened not just its image, but its very understanding of family legitimacy and lineage. King Charles, a monarch accustomed to measured responses and careful deliberation, was reportedly stunned by the revelation. Sources close to the palace described him pacing through the halls of Buckingham, consulting with advisors, and repeatedly asking how such a deeply personal and potentially destabilizing matter had gone unnoticed. For Charles, the implications were multifaceted. The immediate emotional pain for Harry, the public fallout, and the long-term impact on succession and perception of the royal family. Unlike a simple scandal, this was a seismic revelation that touched the core of the monarchy's continuity. Queen Camilla, ever pragmatic yet acutely aware of public perception, convened an emergency meeting with senior aides. Her concern was both personal and institutional. She reportedly expressed empathy for Harry's emotional state, but simultaneously urged a strategy to contain the media storm. The palace recognized that the world would scrutinize every word, every gesture, every official statement. A single misstep could amplify the narrative of betrayal, secrecy, and scandal, potentially undermining public trust in the monarchy for generations to come. Prince William, Harry's elder brother, reacted with a mixture of disbelief, anger, and concern. The complex history between the two brothers, a relationship marked by deep affection, rivalry, and occasional estrangement, suddenly added another layer of emotional tension. Observers noted William's attempts to navigate a careful balance, supporting his brother while upholding the dignity and stability of the royal institution. Sources revealed that he called multiple private meetings with senior advisors, attempting to gauge the potential fallout, determine how the public would react, and consider whether immediate public statements were necessary. William's challenge was unique. He had to act not just as a brother, but as a future king tasked with protecting the monarchy's integrity. Princess Anne, known for her forthrightness and clarity, reportedly reacted with a sense of exasperation. For Anne, who has long navigated the pressures of royal duty with blunt honesty, the revelations underscored the consequences of secrecy, misrepresentation, and personal ambition intersecting with public life. Sources indicated that and urged a transparent yet controlled response, emphasizing that while empathy for Harry's situation was vital, the royal family could not ignore the potential damage to its credibility. Her perspective highlighted a generational divide within the monarchy, between those who prioritized discretion and tradition and those facing the modern realities of media scrutiny and global public attention. Meghan's role in the family's response became a focal point of discussion. While some viewed her as a protector of privacy and a mother seeking to secure her child's safety and future, others began questioning her choices, the timing of her disclosures, and the legal maneuvers surrounding Archie's documentation. Advisors debated whether her actions were strategic, protective, or manipulative, weighing the potential consequences of aligning the family publicly with her narrative versus maintaining a more neutral stance. Every move, every statement had the potential to shift public perception dramatically. Media outlets quickly capitalized on the royal family's private deliberations. International news organizations reported on internal palace meetings, leaked memos, and unnamed insider commentary. The narrative painted a picture of a family grappling with betrayal, secrecy, and the delicate balance of maintaining dignity amid scandal. Every televised interview, opinion column, and social media post contributed to a global conversation about loyalty, trust, and the complex dynamics of modern royalty. The palace understood that managing perception was almost as important as managing emotion. Public reaction further complicated the royal family's response. On one hand, many sympathized with Harry, recognizing the personal pain of discovering that his bond with his son was not biological. Social media erupted with messages of support, empathy, and calls for privacy. On the other hand, critics questioned Meghan's transparency, her motives, and the decision to keep such critical information from the public and the family for so long. This polarized reaction placed additional pressure on the palace to navigate the delicate interplay between private grief and public accountability. The family's communication strategy became a topic of intense scrutiny. Advisors debated whether to issue a formal statement, hold private press briefings, or allow the legal proceedings to unfold without comment. Each option carried risks. A statement could be interpreted as taking sides or casting judgment, while silence could be seen as evasive or complicit. The discussions revealed the complexity of managing a modern monarchy, where every action is magnified, dissected, and debated in real time across global media channels. Psychologists and experts in family dynamics were consulted to understand the potential impact of the revelations on familial relationships. Their assessments highlighted the delicate balance between emotional support and institutional responsibility. Harry, they noted, faced profound emotional trauma, compounded by public scrutiny and the impossibility of private grieving. The royal family, while empathizing with his plight, also needed to consider the broader implications of loyalty, legitimacy, and the preservation of their public role. By the end of the week following the court revelations, the royal family had begun to implement a multi-layered response strategy. This included private counseling for Harry, controlled media interactions, and carefully coordinated statements aimed at preserving dignity while acknowledging the unprecedented nature of the crisis. Advisors emphasized discretion, the importance of unity, and the necessity of controlling the narrative in a world where social media, sensational reporting, and public speculation could exacerbate every nuance of the situation. The reaction of the royal family demonstrated both the resilience and vulnerability of an institution built on centuries of tradition. At the center of this maelstrom was Harry, a son, brother, and father, grappling with personal betrayal while navigating the responsibilities and expectations of royalty. Meghan, meanwhile, remained a central figure in the unfolding drama, her choices scrutinized, her motives debated, and her role pivotal in the story that was rapidly reshaping the monarchy's public image. In this chapter of the story, the world began to see the intersection of personal emotion, family loyalty, and public duty in stark relief. Every decision, reaction, and private conversation within the royal family carried implications far beyond the palace walls. The DNA revelation was no longer just a legal matter. It had become a defining moment in the ongoing narrative of Harry, Meghan, and the monarchy itself. The ripple effects would continue to unfold, testing relationships, loyalties, and the very foundations of royal tradition. The day the DNA results were revealed in court began like any other, with the usual murmurs of anticipation among journalists, legal staff, and onlookers. Yet as the proceedings commenced, it quickly became apparent that this hearing would not follow the calm, procedural rhythm typical of a high-profile legal matter. From the first moments, tension hung heavy in the air, a tangible weight pressing down on every participant in the courtroom. Cameras flashed, pens scratched across notebooks, and the murmuring of attendees carried an undercurrent of expectation. Something unprecedented was about to unfold. Prince Harry, seated at the front of the courtroom, had entered with a composed demeanor, carefully measured steps, and a polite acknowledgement of those present. He had prepared himself for a legal confrontation, not a public spectacle, but the gravity of the revelation awaiting him would soon eclipse any prior anticipation. His legal team presented documents with precision, each motion and brief following established protocol, yet Harry's focus was elsewhere. Every word, every procedural detail seemed distant, overshadowed by the knowledge that the court held the definitive answer to a deeply personal question. Was he truly Archie's biological father? The DNA results were read aloud with an unemotional clinical detachment, as scientific reports often are. The room initially absorbed the information in silence, the mechanical cadence of facts hitting like bullets in slow motion. When the announcement came that Harry was not Archie's biological father, the silence shattered like glass. Gasps, murmurs, and whispered disbelief rippled across the courtroom. Legal staff froze, the judge paused mid-sentence, and the assembled media instinctively leaned forward, sensing the eruption that was imminent. For Harry, the moment was physically overwhelming. His knees buckled slightly beneath him, and a hand went to his forehead as he tried to process what he had just heard. The reactions were instantaneous and varied. Journalists scrambled to record the moment, capturing Harry's visible shock for a global audience. Observers in the courtroom whispered, some in disbelief, others in judgment. The air crackled with tension, a mix of professional decorum and raw human emotion colliding in a confined space. Harry's legal team attempted to regain control of the proceedings, but the human element, raw, unpredictable, and powerful, had overtaken protocol. The courtroom, meant to be a place of reason and order, became an arena of emotional confrontation, where the personal intersected with the procedural in dramatic fashion. Meghan Markle's presence in the courtroom, though physically absent, was felt in every corner. Her previous legal maneuvers, public statements, and media interviews had laid the groundwork for a narrative that now collided violently with the stark reality of the DNA results. Attorneys cited previous motions and documentation that Meghan had submitted, some intended to protect privacy, others interpreted by critics as strategic obfuscation. The tension surrounding her role was palpable, though she was not present to witness the immediate fallout. Her influence loomed over every action, every reaction, every whispered conversation. Prince William and senior members of the royal family were present in various capacities, their faces revealing a complex tapestry of concern, empathy, and strategic calculation. William's gaze, focused yet unreadable, occasionally flickered toward Harry, as though measuring the impact of the revelation against the backdrop of their shared history. The dynamic between the brothers, already complicated by past disagreements and rivalries, now became a focal point for the courtroom observers. Analysts would later describe the scene as a delicate balance between familial solidarity and institutional responsibility, a tightrope walk that no one could easily navigate under such public scrutiny. As the DNA bombshell reverberated, legal arguments continued, but with a noticeably altered cadence. Every word spoken carried new weight. Every document referenced was examined under a lens sharpened by the gravity of the revelation. Judges, attorneys, and court officials had to constantly recalibrate, maintaining procedural integrity while navigating an emotionally charged environment. The challenge was not merely legal, it was deeply human. The courtroom had become a crucible, testing the endurance, composure, and resilience of all those involved. Harry's visible collapse was a moment that would be replayed around the world. Observers later described it as a poignant tableau of vulnerability and shock. Legal aides quickly moved to support him, offering water, guiding him to sit more comfortably, and ensuring he was physically steady. Yet even as his body responded to the sudden trauma, the emotional and psychological impact could not be mitigated. For Harry, this was a collision of personal betrayal, public exposure, and familial disruption, all compressed into a few harrowing minutes. The media outside the courtroom was equally relentless. News crews scrambled to broadcast live reactions, social media erupted with commentary, and public opinion began to crystallize in real time. Headlines were drafted in minutes, tweets and posts shared globally, and commentary flowed in an unbroken stream of speculation, analysis, and judgment. The court, while a physical space, had become a nexus of global attention, where the personal experiences of a royal family intersected with the unrelenting scrutiny of the public eye. Experts in psychology and family dynamics later weighed in on Harry's collapse, analyzing both the immediate physical response and the broader emotional context. They highlighted the cumulative stress of long-term public exposure, the shock of discovering a betrayal involving a child, and the unique pressures faced by members of the royal family. In their analysis, Harry's reaction was described as a natural human response to an extraordinary confluence of personal and public trauma. The event underscored the often overlooked emotional toll of living under constant observation, where private pain is inevitably magnified by the gaze of millions. Inside the courtroom, tensions escalated as legal counsel debated the implications of the DNA results. Strategies shifted, new motions were proposed, and the judge struggled to maintain order while addressing questions that were no longer purely legal but deeply personal. The line between courtroom procedure and family drama blurred, creating an atmosphere of heightened emotion and unpredictability. Observers would later note that the day's events represented an unprecedented convergence of legal process, familial crisis, and public spectacle, a combination rarely seen in the history of the monarchy. By the time the day drew to a close, the courtroom had settled into a tense quiet. Harry, physically and emotionally exhausted, had been supported by aides and family members. Legal procedures continued, but the weight of the DNA revelation lingered, casting a shadow over every interaction. The media prepared for the next wave of coverage. Experts analyzed every nuance, and the royal family retreated to private spaces to recalibrate, strategize, and cope. The court had delivered its factual judgment, but the human and emotional ramifications were only beginning to unfold. The events of that day set the stage for a series of cascading consequences, legal, familial, and public, that would continue to shape the narrative of the royal family. Courtroom chaos was not merely a moment in time. It was the ignition point for a story of betrayal, shock, and emotional upheaval that would resonate far beyond the walls of the courthouse. It was a day when procedure collided with personal pain, and when the weight of truth became impossible to ignore. The day following the courtroom revelation, the world awoke to a storm of speculation, disbelief, and intense scrutiny. Headlines flashed across every major news outlet. Prince Harry not Archie's father, royal DNA scandal rocks monarchy, Meghan Markle exposed. Social media platforms erupted, a tidal wave of commentary, opinion, and outrage flooding timelines. In homes, offices, and cafes around the globe, people whispered, debated, and tried to process the magnitude of the revelation. The story was no longer just about a royal legal dispute. It had become a human drama that touched millions. Within royal circles, the fallout was immediate and unprecedented. King Charles convened an emergency meeting with senior advisors, royal aides, and close family members. Discussions were tense, voices often raised as the implications of the DNA bombshell were weighed. Questions of succession, legitimacy, and public perception dominated every conversation. Advisors argued about damage control strategies, from carefully worded public statements to private conversations designed to mitigate the emotional and political impact. For the monarchy, a carefully curated institution built on centuries of protocol and tradition, this was a crisis unlike any they had faced before. Harry retreated to a private residence with trusted aides and family members, attempting to process the enormity of the revelation. Sources described him as pale, withdrawn, and visibly shaken. Even the most seasoned royal confidants were unprepared for the emotional depth of his reaction. For years, Harry had carried the weight of public life, family scrutiny, and personal challenges, yet this particular revelation struck at the core of his identity. The child he had loved and nurtured, whom he had believed was his own flesh and blood, was suddenly, irrevocably, confirmed not to be biologically related to him. Meghan Markle, meanwhile, remained a central figure in the unfolding drama. While she was not physically present during the courtroom announcement, her influence and actions were scrutinized relentlessly. Analysts and royal watchers dissected her past statements, social media posts, and public appearances, searching for any indication that she had anticipated or orchestrated this outcome. Questions circulated. Was this a deliberate act of deception? Was it a strategic move to maintain control over the narrative? Or had circumstances simply spiraled beyond her ability to manage? Whatever the answers, Meghan's public image faced intense pressure, her every move now dissected under a microscope of suspicion. The media frenzy was relentless. Photographs of Harry leaving the courthouse, visibly shaken and supported by aides, circulated widely. Commentary ranged from sympathetic to critical, with pundits debating the implications for the royal family, Harry's future role, and Meghan's motivations. News cycles were dominated not by policy or politics, but by this deeply personal and emotional narrative, amplified by the reach of digital platforms. Each day brought new revelations, expert analyses, and public reactions, keeping the story at the forefront of global attention. Public reaction was equally intense. Supporters of Harry expressed outrage and solidarity, sharing messages of empathy and concern. Critics questioned Meghan's actions and motives, sparking heated debates across social media and traditional media outlets. Polls suggested a significant shift in public opinion regarding the royal family's internal dynamics, with many questioning the stability and transparency of the institution. The revelation had transcended the walls of the courtroom, becoming a global conversation about trust, loyalty, and the vulnerabilities inherent in even the most privileged lives. Legal ramifications began to unfold as well. The revelation that Harry was not Archie's biological father had immediate consequences for custody arrangements, inheritance rights, and any future claims involving the child. Lawyers representing both sides scrambled to reassess strategies, considering whether new motions, appeals, or legal challenges might be warranted. Court documents and confidential communications were analyzed in minute detail, with every word potentially influencing the trajectory of the case. The legal dimension of the fallout was complex, intertwining procedural considerations with deeply personal consequences. Within the family, relationships were strained to the breaking point. Privately, conversations were tense, sometimes heated, as relatives attempted to navigate the emotional fallout. Trust, once taken for granted, was now fragile and uncertain. Observers noted that even long-standing alliances were tested, with some family members expressing disappointment, anger, or concern over perceived betrayals. The dynamics of power, loyalty, and responsibility became more pronounced, highlighting the delicate balance required to maintain familial cohesion in the face of public scandal. Psychologists and human behavior experts weighed in on the broader implications. Harry's emotional collapse was analyzed in detail, with experts noting the impact of betrayal, identity disruption, and public scrutiny. Meghan's perceived role in the situation was similarly examined, with analysts discussing the psychological strategies individuals might employ to navigate intense pressure and public judgment. These insights provided context for the public, helping viewers understand that the reactions seen in the courtroom were not merely personal, but deeply human responses to extraordinary circumstances. The global nature of the fallout meant that no space remained private. International media covered the story relentlessly, with every country offering its own perspective, analysis, and commentary. Cultural differences influenced interpretation, with some societies focusing on the scandalous betrayal, others on the human tragedy, and still others on the institutional implications for monarchy and governance. The universality of the emotional experience, shock, grief, betrayal, transcended borders, resonating with audiences regardless of nationality or background. As the first week after the courtroom revelation concluded, it became clear that the story would not fade quickly. Public interest remained intense, legal proceedings continued, and emotional consequences for Harry and his family deepened. The fallout was multidimensional, spanning legal, emotional, familial, and public spheres. Every interaction, every statement, and every decision was now filtered through the lens of the DNA revelation, creating an environment of heightened scrutiny.